It's me, Jon Savage, the Digital Savage. Welcome to another episode, and this one is a bit of a special edition. Normally these podcasts are like short and sharp, 4 or 5 minutes, like one strong idea, let's get through it. But this one is over an hour. And the reason is I was very honored to be invited to the Institute of Marketing Management South Africa. They have this thing called Flash Talk Fridays, where they sort of choose a subject and then really go in depth. And what is quite special about this podcast, and I'm super duper excited for you to actually check it, we go really deep into the industry, the insights, the metrics, the values, the misunderstandings, the branding, the future, the monetizations in a way that I don't think I ever have before. It was such a nice discussion and so many great people in it that I felt like after that, like, wow, this I'd like to put on the podcast. And I kindly asked them and they said yes, so thank you guys. I think you'll really enjoy this, so buckle in. And this is quite a roller coaster, and some of the questions were like, what are the bad things that happen in the podcasting, what are the challenges? And so we sort of tackled a lot of stuff. So for those who are like deadly serious about the industry of podcasting as a career, I think you're really going to enjoy this podcast. Okay, please subscribe if you're on YouTube, subscribe if you're on Spotify or Apple. I really appreciate it. Put a comment in, it really helps me and builds the podcast for me. Recommend to anyone else, and if you've got any questions, find me on Instagram. I'm at Jon Savage, or Facebook or LinkedIn. You can find me. I'd love to answer your questions. All right, enough babble mouth. Let's go.
Welcome to the IMM Friday Flash Talk, anchored by Govan Whittles.
The reason why that responsibility was taken away from the Hawks is not yet known.
With marketing enthusiast Terasai Moffat.
To have a return on sales, you need to have posts that are going to be engaging.
Brought to you by the Institute of Marketing Management, South Africa. Welcome everyone to the Institute of Marketing Management of South Africa's IMM Friday Flash Talk. It's the first of many. It'll come up at the end of each month, where we explore all the latest trends in marketing, provide you some insights with a lot of cool guest speakers. Myself as the host, Govan Whittles, and with me I have Terasai Moffat. She's an marketing consultant, also the founder of Gateway Synergy. And kicking off the IMM Friday Flash Talk is our first guest. His name is Jon Savage. He's really infamous in the world of podcasting. He's joining us to talk about the latest marketing trends in podcasting. Jon is the founder of In Broadcasting, an innovation broadcasting firm. He has his own his own podcast. Is known in the world of caster, someone who comes up with cool discussions, who's plugged into the latest trends. And today we'll be talking about what the world of podcasting has to offer to the world of marketing. It's been described as the comeback kid of marketing. The podcasting audience is growing on the African continent, a lot of money being made in the United States, and it does seem to be translating to some African countries. And we'll begin with a broad and engaging discussion with Jon as well as Terasai. But let's first get a few of Jon's views on podcasting and his engagements with the marketing aspect of it. Jon, just take us through some of your initial takeaways from what it's been like to engage with these brands, what kind of marketing strategies are being applied, and what you think the world of podcasting has to offer for marketers.
Thanks so much, Govan, and you look sharp.
Thanks, bro.
No, super excited. I mean, this topic is very exciting for me. So, I mean, just a little bit about the business and broadcasting, because, we specialize in innovations in broadcasting. I mean, that term broadcasting, we don't think of it as like sort of TV, radio. We're working very closely with TikTok, with YouTube, with Spotify and Apple, across the board. And one of the most exciting parts of this whole digital broadcasting space we have found to be in the podcasting. And so what started off as a passion, I did my first podcast in 2009, and never really thought the industry would move as fast as it has been now. And now there's a whole podcasting environment that's very healthy. And what is very exciting, and I'll sort of just shoot from the hip, from a marketing perspective, and I'm not saying this because it's the business that I'm in. Like I said, this whole business is about like being at the tipping point of these kind of changes in marketing. And there is such opportunity in podcasting right now, in the same way you brought up, the reason that the US market, as you brought up, is so healthy is because not everybody's playing in it. There were a few brands like the mattress brands, the VPN brands like ExpressVPN, the Zip Recruiter type brands who are like advertising for jobs recruitment that dominate. They've turned like small businesses into multi-million dollar businesses through podcasting, identifying the opportunity in a new space, and they got in there early. Like, who thought that your mattress brand could be a multi-million dollar business or a razor brand? And it was by identifying the opportunity in the podcasting space, getting in early and dominating. Because the cost of entry, the barrier of entry was so low, and brands were hesitant to get in. Those brands absolutely cleaned up, and we have the same opportunity not only to learn from what's happening in the rest of the world, but our what was a year ago a fledgling business is turning into a massive business. And in terms of reach, if you just, from an ideological perspective, take 30 or 40 podcasters, group them together, you've got the biggest radio station in the country by far, bigger than any television station or radio station in terms of reach, in terms of engagement. Some of the more interesting things about the research that's done in the last few years is like even at the end of last year, Nielsen's ratings said that podcast listeners had a 70% retention rate, like hearing a brand from the first time and remembering that. And a lot of that is that the opportunity in podcasting, and I'll start with the opportunity and then I'll talk about the risks. The opportunity in podcasting is that, number one, people are finding this content. They're finding their favorite podcasts. And let me just take a back step. I know I'm going all over. I just want to tell you some of the podcasters I work with. So obviously, I work with Mac G, the biggest podcaster in the country by far. Controversial character from a marketing perspective. We'll have a discussion about brand safety, but in terms of reach, you're looking at over 1 million people a week easily across video and audio from one single person's show, which is not and I'm not, sometimes I get these emails from radio stations that I'm going out and bashing radio. I'm a radio fan. I love radio. I come from radio. But, one of the shortfalls from a marketing perspective in the radio space is that the metrics, the audience metrics are kind of, I don't want to say guessing, that's probably rude, but it's extrapolated from like targeted research, segmented research to say, we think roughly 1 million people are listening a week or whatever the numbers are. Metro FM has 5 million listeners. Now, when are those? That doesn't mean that those 5 million people are listening at all times. It doesn't mean they're listening to your ad. In the podcasting space, a couple of things. One, a listener or a viewer means a listener and a viewer. I can tell you when they logged on, how long they watched for, when they got out. I can tell you whether they listened to your ad or skipped the ad. So if I'm giving you a metric for your brand about how many people you reached when you actually listened to that ad, I'm giving you a very, very specific number. If somebody listened to only 3/4 of the ad before they skipped, I can tell you that level of information. So in terms of the metrics in the podcasting space are incredibly accurate. And so that's one asset. The second asset is, I was also saying, so I work with everyone from Mac G, DJ Fresh, Lebo Lion, Vusi Tembakwayo, who's just incredible, and a lot of other guys, and so each of those, what is interesting about the podcasting space also to parallel is that when you are marketing into this, let's say the radio or the TV space, it's a broad reach that you're getting. So your 5 million people are sort of 5 million broad people that you kind of have their demographics on them. In the podcasting space, because you can segment down to the suburb in a single podcast or by identifying niches within podcasts. So you can go as big or as small as you want. If you're just looking for broadband reach, for example, maybe you're a banking product, you want as many people to hear it as possible. Yes, you could use podcasting. Yes, probably TV and radio is better for you. But if you're that same bank and you have a very specific, let's say, youth market targeted card or product, and you want to reach the target market that is specific to you, podcast is the best segmentation and kind of niche orientation, where you can partner with 3 or 4 podcasters and literally be speaking to your target audience. The easiest way to kind of define this is if you can imagine you are a bicycle or a high-end fishing rod company, and each of your fishing rods, they're so high-end, they cost 50,000 Rand for a fishing rod. I don't know anything about fishing. I don't know why I used that example, but I'm just giving you. So, if you're in the traditional world, you're sort of putting your ad in the fishing magazines and other few places that you can. But in the podcasting space, you can really drill down. So you can get a subsection of the fishing. So it's not like everyone who's interested in fishing are interested in 50,000 Rand fishing rods. You can find podcasts that are specific to high end, like the people who own yachts and like to do that high life fishing. And you can, even if there's only 1,500 people listening to that podcast, you have a much higher conversion rate if you're selling a 50,000 Rand fishing rod than you will to 1 million people who may or may not be interested. So that's one of the interesting sort of ways to look at segmented marketing that's hugely powerful. And on top of that is the engagement factor. And this is what all the ratings, podcast lovers know this, but the ratings have now all backed this up from the Nielsen. All these global reports have backed up that because people have an affinity with their podcast, it's different from going in the car and listening to the breakfast DJ that you love. In podcasting, you're seeking out the person that you love and listening to them regularly, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, the whole show in your time, whether you're jogging, whether you're working, whether you're sleeping, and your engagement with that is much higher. And when that you build a trust affinity with a podcaster that has been shown to be significantly higher than any other media. So when that podcaster tells you about a brand, you are much more likely to remember it, listen to it, and convert. So the conversion rates are much higher. And also there's a weird sort of sentimental thing where you realize that you're getting your podcast for free, that by following the brand link or actually engaging with that brand, you're also supporting your favorite podcaster. So there's a whole sort of direct relationship there that we've seen, like we've moved the needle with podcasts when we do campaigns where we try to do campaigns where traditional media is not running on the same day. So you can show, we've crashed websites with podcasts just to show the affinity with the podcast hosts. And that is, I don't know how long I've been speaking for. There's so much more in this topic. I could speak for another hour if you want. That's sort of a basic entry level into like the podcasting space is growing healthily. There's amazing opportunities. Oh, yes. The brand safety is a very important part of this. And it's come up so many times. Guys like Mac, they're both kind of the best and the worst. Not as people. I just mean in terms of what do you call it? An example of what goes right and what goes wrong. With Mac, you can reach the widest audience you could possibly reach on any other media, plus get immediate conversion. So if you have a soft product like we've just done a campaign with a global sort of crypto wallet. They don't really mind about the controversy part. They just want to sell crypto in their wallet. That's their metric. We absolutely can move the needle for a brand like that with conversions. But because Mac is controversial, the space is unregulated, he can say things that upset people. It's why he sort of tweets, he trends on Twitter every week. And that's a good thing for some brands and really bad for other brands. But Mac is a sort of isolated incident in the rest of the umbrella. So we run a podcast network called the Africa Podcast Network. It's the biggest network on the continent. There's lots of, there's a lot of guys in the brand and tech space, business and tech space who are much more safe. They're not going to offend anyone, but it is an unregulated environment. So actually understanding how to manage the podcast, it's kind of like working with an artist or a musician. You might endorse an artist and their sex tape comes out on the weekend, or something in their song is controversial. So there is that kind of risk that is easily mitigated. Like a year or two ago, we were in trouble a lot. We've really managed to corporatize the environment by just working a lot with podcasters, educating podcasters, understanding that like making sure the brand's safety is an important component. So I think we're in a much healthier place now, and that's what makes it like a sort of exciting space. I don't know if you want to shoot questions. I think I could just babble forever.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I mean, a lot of insights there. Listen, you've done incredible work with a lot of these top-class podcasters, certainly a leader in the field when it comes to developing strategies towards brands, which I think is really what this conversation is about. And you have a lot of insight in terms of how the brands respond to the podcast, but I'd like to bring in Tarasai to Tarasai, what do you think the general attitude is of marketers towards podcasts? Maybe we could just get a sense from the people who are placing the ads or working with the podcast. What I've recently realized is that a lot of audiences respond really well to brands that actually partner with podcasts and don't necessarily just drop their advert onto a podcast. But that's just one element of how brands, marketers are approaching podcasts. What do you think the general attitude is, Tarasai?
I think the general attitude is it's good. It's rising, especially because of COVID. People realized that they now needed to be online and they needed that community, that engagement, that one touch with your brand. So it's not just push advertising. This is actually engagement. They can actually do a podcast showing how to use your product if you are involved in the pre-production stage. So I think as a brand, it's important that you go in from the pre-production stage and then you partner for a series, because yes, a podcast can be a one episode, or it can be a series where it's 3 or 4 or 5 episodes, and you work hand in hand with a podcaster as a content creator to develop content for your brand. And you can always do legal contracts. You sign a legal contract that says you're in for this period of time. This is the outcome. This is the revenue. This is the exit clause. I think there's an interview that John did that has an exit clause so that brands are aware that they can actually step back. But it is a safe space that brands need to operate in because it involves engagement. I'll give an example. In Kenya, recently, they had a women's podcast, which was very interesting because it was tied in with Women's Month. And it gave women a voice to call in and be able to talk and to engage, which brought about that warmth that, oh my word, I'm a mother, she's a mother, we're sisters. Can we have this conversation with the brand and see where we can take our product?
Was that Adele's podcast by any chance?
No, it was a lady in Kenya. It was part of Josephine's one, actually, when they did the Global Podcast Day in Kenya.
Cool.
Yeah.
You spoke about an exit clause. John, you finding the brands coming to you, to the podcast you work with, and prioritizing something like that, an exit clause, particularly since you've spoken about brand safety and the risk associated with it?
Look, I think it's important, but it's not the be all and end all. Like, I think there are a couple of podcasters who are doing very crazy things and they're getting crazy numbers. Now, if you want to play in that game, and not everybody does, if you want to play in that game, maximum risk, maximum reward, then and I'm telling you, maximum reward, but real sort of risk associated. Then your contracting becomes key, because should things not work out, and the purpose of a contract, and we in the business have learned this the hard way. You put a contract together when everything is going well, but it's all about what happens when you break up. And I think because the podcasting space is unregulated, you want to be clear about, if things don't work out, how can we both leave with our feathers intact? And that's what that exit clause is about. But it is really, we're kind of getting stuck on that point, because I'd say, 70 to 80% of the podcasts don't have that risk, but it's at the forefront because the leader of the pack is a risky investment. But like I said, if you just want to sell your thing, then you'll get it. But if like reputation is very important, then you have to be a bit more cautious about these sorts of things. And then the other mitigation here, that is probably a lot of brands are wanting to do their own podcasts. So we're working with a lot of brands now who are creating their own podcasts. And in that space, first one, that helps with the risk mitigation. You have more control over what's going out. And there's pros and cons. The con is, if you are a brand a brand podcast, there's quite a lot of work you need to do to get audience engagement and audience trust. You can't buy this audience. There's no possibility of buying a podcasting audience. It has to be organic. So if you are, brand podcast, you're just going to not get anywhere. So working with like trusted voices and making sure your podcast is really organic sounding and looking, and most importantly, giving value. So if you're doing a podcast about your product, no one's going to give a damn. But if you're giving value into your target market, you can get a lot of success there, and you can also chop and change who hosts it over a period of time. So that's another way that brands are doing that to mitigate those sorts of risks.
Look, I saw a recent statistics or a commentary on podcasts describing the emergence of marketing in podcasts as being similar to the 2018-2019 emergence of social media influencers, and how brands are kind of taking the same approach, which is look and see what will happen. But the real difference here is the growth in the field of podcasts. I mean, in the US, some statistics show that the spending on podcasts is up to 4.2 billion rand. That's what it will be in 2024. That'll be up 100% since 2022. I saw in 2021, last year, the podcast advertising grew by 30% in South Africa, and it's 41% in Nigeria. But Tarasai, do you think that what we're dealing with here is something that's growing at a pace that's fueled by excitement? Or do you think that we're seeing like real investment happening because of returns? I don't really know what the marketers feel about the growth that's emerging in podcasts and what they have to say about that.
To be honest, podcasting forms part of a marketing mix, which is why I think what Jon said was relevant when he says it's part of a rock and roll band. You know, in a band, you've got different elements that have to play. You've got your drummer, you've got your pianist, you've got your guitarist. There's different plays at field. Same with any marketing strategy. You come up with a marketing strategy that says we're going to be on digital, we're going to be on social media, we're going to be on the podcast, but over and above that, we're going to do out of home, and we're going to have our out of home speak into the different channels. So it's not a copy and paste in terms of I make a TV commercial, I chop it up and I throw it in a podcast and I expect it to have a reaction. But it's almost to say for each, I need a different strategy. And my marketing strategy needs to pull into that. So you chop and change and you say, okay, for this platform, this is the best strategy. So you need to almost have a strategy for each platform, if I'm correct, Jon. I'm sure you've got a marketing strategy for your podcast. You place yourself at different places, be it on Google, be it on Spotify, be it at events. MacG has a reputation of being at events and doing live events, which gets that engagement going as well. So there's an actual structured strategy that goes with podcast marketing.
Teresa, is it better for a brand to start their own podcast or to look for like someone as dynamic as MacG or as engaging as Vusi Tembakwayo to kind of, I don't know, carry the viewer towards the brand?
I think it depends with your brand and your brand mission and what your brand stands for. If you are, let's say, a Chicken Licker, a Nando's, they're very, they're bold in their approach, in their marketing strategy. They're happy to take risks. They're happy for their brand to be out there. So they would position themselves ideally with an influencer and podcaster like that. And then you've got your brands like your United Nations that have set criteria, rules, and standards as to what you need to say and when you need to say it. That might not fit with that personality. For that, you might need an anchor who's like you, for example, who would fit more in line with their brand. So it's the same with almost influencer marketing. You need to choose who speaks to you, because remember, this is a relationship. You're creating a relationship with your podcaster, with your influencer that's going to stretch for a long period. They will represent you on and off camera. So as you're formulating this relationship, you need to partner with the right person.
Interesting you talk about relationships. Jon, you had who you call the father of podcasting, Gareth Cliff, on one of the chats. He was not only describing the the dynamic nature of the podcasting audience. People who are self-employed have more than one property, have a lot of disposable income. Gareth Cliff described that as like the marketer's dream. It certainly is, because those are the people they're trying to speak to directly. But another interesting conversation he had was around how they had a brand partnership with Taylor Blinds, started a podcast called Blind History, and it led to Taylor Blinds eventually taking all of their social media spend and moving it directly to the podcast because of the engagement and the return that they were getting from that podcast. Do you think that those kind of relationships are a potential right now? Do you see that some of the brands that are approaching the guys you work with are looking towards that, trying to remove their spending from social media and direct it toward podcasts?
So that's a great question. What I'll do is let me unpack the commercial opportunities inside podcasting. But what you've said, I mean, that is the gold. The gold part of podcasting is the fluid nature of it. When you're on a traditional media, there's limited airtime and you have to fit into a structure. But podcasters are way more open to trying stuff. So just to go back to the MacG scenario, because I wanted to give you other examples, but you just hit on what Gareth said. With the Bybit, sorry, I didn't mean to mention the brand. With the international cryptocurrency client that we did, we identified immediately that a big problem in Africa was actually the education around the product. So it wasn't going to be, if Mac just went onto his podcast and started speaking about this product, it wasn't going to lead to conversions because people don't understand crypto for better or for worse. So just take your judgment hat off for now. I'm just saying as a brand. So what we did was, for this brand, is we teamed up with the biggest crypto expert on the continent in Nigeria, and we created a sub podcast hosted by Mac and Gray, where it was a weekly educational piece around crypto, and that podcast became the driver for conversions. And the main body podcast was like, go, if you're interested in crypto, go check out this podcast that we're doing. So we created a unique funnel that didn't exist before we met the brand, but that made perfect sense financially to both of us and them. So we were playing an extra role of an educational to push into conversions. And now just to take a step back into the commercial opportunities. So in the podcasting space, a lot of things are changing at the moment. And our business is sort of taking on a new form as well. Yes, there's like the sort of influencer play where the brand is endorsing the podcaster. And that is the biggest sort of return and biggest rewards and the most kind of sought after space. The problem with those as a podcaster or as from a marketing perspective is they take a lot of effort and energy and a lot of synergy to be able to put that deal together. And that's not a negative necessarily, but I'm saying that doesn't keep the business running. So a big part of the business is that. Now, if we were to come down a chain, there's lots of other space in a podcast you can sponsor, and that comes from like live reads from the host, or a product placement, or a discussion about a product, so something that's more integrated into the show in a more natural way. There's also pre-rolls and mid-rolls, which, you know, having your ad at the beginning, having your ad in the middle. And what's nicer about those, sometimes for some brands, not for other brands, one, it's more affordable, but two, you're actually buying into the audience, not necessarily the host. You know, we were talking about risk assessment. If you're always buying into the host, you're sort of limiting the host and yourself about the possibilities. It's like an ambassadorship. But if you just focus on audience numbers and audience reach, you can place ads that are in your podcast that are getting the audience that you're reaching without having to endorse the ambassador. And what's good about that is that now you can put your ad on 7 different podcasts that all sort of collectively find the demographic reach that you're looking for without having to invest in the podcaster. And that's a lot of the work. So with the Africa Podcast Network, a lot of what we've identified as a problem is like having to do a deal with each of those podcasters and find their market and get their analytics and wait for them to return your email and return to your phone calls. That's a big problem. So with the Africa Podcast Network, we've taken on 40 of the biggest podcasters on the continent. We shared their back end so that we have aggregated analytics, demographics. We're able to put in ads, take out ads programmatically. We can upsell to ambassadorship, and it's taken a lot of the pain out of having to sort of identify all the different podcasters. So in a podcast or in a audience metric of many podcasts, there's actually lots of touch points that brands can engage with. So when I say touch points, I mean opportunities. That's the exciting part.
Yeah, it is really exciting. And look, what does that mean? Is that like a brand looking for a niche market? Or and then you having the back end of 40 podcasters and saying,
well, it's both.
I'll plug you in over here and there.
If you come and say, I'm trying to reach 7 million people, then we turn you on to everyone in the network. If you're saying I'm trying to reach high, I'm a high-end wealth product, I'm looking for CEOs of businesses, those are the people I'm looking for, then we'll give you these 3 podcasts. If you're looking for female empowerment, if your product speaks to female empowerment, then we'll give you these 3. If it's a alcohol product and you're looking for people who are interested in music in the music space, we'll give you these 7. So it is actually gives you both of those sorts of the things. It gives you the mass reach and it gives you the segmented, hyper-focused reach, which is what, that's the beauty and unique nature of podcasts.
So given
It
that,
depends on who's advertising.
What? Sorry, what's the question?
That's how you're saying? Yeah, I think it depends on who's advertising. I guess
100%.
That goes to the next theme, really. Like, who is advertising? Are we seeing really big companies changing their massive strategies, or has someone launched a product, doesn't want to bother with going to TV or radio, and saying, let me break my product on the podcasts? Is that what's happening?
I think, thank you. A lot of brands are playing in this space, a lot. And it's not always, it's the usual suspects, the big brands, but it's a lot of the smaller brands who can't afford to podcasting is extremely affordable, high engagement podcasting. I mean, it's ridiculous in terms of the rate of return. And that's because it's still a new market and people are hesitant. And to answer your question, what I was saying at the beginning, there is opportunity to smash into this market with a bold player. But because everyone is tiptoeing in the market, the opportunity is there to be taken, because no one is doing like we were speaking about, the blind companies and the mattress companies, and they're not there yet. And the opportunity is like ripe for someone to just come in there while the costs are low, while the podcasters are still developing. You could support the whole industry and break your product in this market, in my opinion.
They are tiptoeing, though, in some respects. And why do you think that is, Tarasai? We've spoken about brand safety, but we've also established, as the statistics show, I mean, in South Africa, you could get a podcast advert for as cheap as 400 Rand, but you could also end up paying 30,000 Rand to get either a live read or maybe a 5-minute interview, which is showing to be one of the more commercially successful ways of marketing your brand. In fact, Bloomberg reporting that some podcasters in the US charging up to $50,000 to conduct specific interviews around their brands. But still, there's this hesitance in South Africa, and though it's growing by 30%, we're not understanding why there still is that hesitance. What do you think, Tarsa?
To be honest, that's why we appreciate the Institute of Marketing Management, because they're speaking to a whole host of people at this point. Right now, we have viewers that are watching that are corporates. We have viewers that are watching that are students. We have viewers that are watching that are actually, they take this as a sounding board. So when they invite experts like Jon to come and speak, it creates that level of education and awareness, which is necessary. And I think with podcasts in Africa as a whole, people need to understand, appreciate the amount of time that goes into it. They spend hours doing research. They spend hours prepping themselves. They spend hours investigating, questioning, building a repertoire that it needs to actually be seen as almost a career. And I think at this point, there's still the general mindset that it's not actually a career, without appreciating the level of investment that people like Jon put into the industry. So awareness is very key. And I think the more we have these type of sessions with the Institute of Marketing and other boards and other clients, that's how they begin to appreciate that podcasting is actually important because it gives people a voice that they didn't have before that.
Interesting
Jon,
point,
also
Teresa.
in terms of the
What do you
career
think?
path, do you think that someone can, let's say, drop out of university, just hypothetically drop out of university and say, this is now my career path and this is the path that I'm going to take, and there's a future for them?
I would never recommend that. Thank you. Look, no, yes and no. Okay, it's not speaking to, when we speak to podcasters, we're very involved in podcast strategy. The thing about podcasts is it's a snowball, right? Podcasts live and breathe on a very slow, low investment, low cost a snowball. It takes a long time to get your podcast up. I've seen a lot of massive celebrities podcasts fail because they don't have, the general pattern I've always seen is that if you have a massive following, millions of people on your Twitter, your first episode, you get lots and lots of views. But by episode 5, they're gone very, very low. And then by that time, the celebrities lost interest, because it really is a slow, hard slog. You're building an audience. The upside from a podcaster is, unlike, when you go onto Metro FM, you're building SABC's audience, or when you go onto someone's platform, you're building their audience. You're building your own audience. It's like, how hard it is to start an Instagram profile and build it. It's one step at a time, one person at a time, one listener at a time, and you build and you build. And the rewards are coming to the podcasters who've stuck in there and kept on going. So if you are at university, start your podcast, whoever you are, start your podcast, have a long-term game plan. Think about a year, think about 2 years, think about 3 years. That's the level of investment it actually requires to build your own podcast. So it's not an overnight thing. The DJ Fresh podcast that we launched 3 weeks ago, that's an anomaly. And he's DJ Fresh. And again, his first episode's massive. We're now like 3 weeks in. Numbers are solid. We're breaking all the records in the podcasting space, but he's got a lot of work to do and it's costing him money, So it's a long, slow game from a podcasting perspective. And that's why there's such massive opportunity from a branding perspective, because it's still raw. It's still like a lot of podcasters, any income they can make from their podcast is income. So that's why there's a lot of negotiation, a lot of return, and also to get in on the ground level while podcasters are building. I'll take DJ Fresh as an example. Again, if you were to be advertising on Fresh's podcast now, remember, sorry, I'm going down a rabbit hole, but it's important to recognize this. In the audio space and in the podcasting and the video space as well, one of the beautiful things about podcasts is that your retrospective archive episodes still get numbers. So if I give you an example, Fresh's first episode only got 20,000 views and about 3,000 listens on the first episode on the first week. But 3 weeks later, it's over 100,000. And that's because people come in at the modern and then they go back and find episodes that they like. So if you're listening to a podcast now that you're seeing has potential, you start sponsoring them or endorsing them or putting your brand on there. As that podcast gets bigger, all your ads are still on their back catalog. So you're actually getting double, triple, quadruple, septuple your ROI based on those sorts of numbers. So that's why I'm saying there's so much cool stuff happening in this space where brands can win.
That's a risk though, because essentially you're taking the chance initially and hoping that what happens to Fresh happens to your brand. But as you've said, a number of celebrity podcasts have bombed. What do they look for though? In that initial engagement. So if the marketer comes to you, does he immediately look for the analytics? He wants to see the back end to see the engagement, or is he trusting the attitude of the podcaster?
So it depends. Some of the brands sometimes come in with the podcaster in mind. They love the podcast, they've seen the thing. But what we do, again, there's different levels of engagement depending on how engaged. But we want to know what your objectives are. The podcasting space has more room to play. So if you are a car brand, and this just happened to us, you're trying to launch a new car, but in a market that doesn't buy that car. So like you're looking to, it's a big 4x4 brand traditionally associated with like, farming, that they're trying to get into an urban youth market and make it cool again. Now, if that's your objective, that's quite it's not just about, blah, I want to put my brand in front of this. We sit and work with that brand and say, well, here is a cool way we could build a strategy that does it organically, spills over into social. When the guys are doing live events, we'll tie it in there. So if we understand the brand objectives, you can build a bespoke campaign. And that's why I was saying the agility of podcasts they're eager to make these things work. So come with an objective, we'll reach that. If you just want broadband reach, we'll smash that for you. If you want something deeper, we'll find a way to work that with you. And the other thing about podcasting is, to your point about, do we look at the analytics? Always looking at the analytics. When you do a TV campaign or a campaign on a TV show, for example, you spend all that time and effort up front. And once it's live, You're in until you pull that. But in the podcasting space, we can measure what's working. We can change the ad and the campaign in real time. We can say that people are only we've got a 45-second ad, but only the first 15 seconds people are listening to. Let's change the ad. Let's make it shorter. Let's try something else. So if we're not reaching your metric, we'll change what's happening in the campaign in real time so that you can't lose. You're always correcting.
Yeah, look, I mean, we're getting into the nitty gritty now, and we'll talk about the pitfalls of podcasting in a moment and some of the failures that have happened with the combinations between brands and podcasters. And then I'd like to get some specifics in terms of the difference in marketing for audio podcasts versus the video podcast. But first, let's take the converse question to what I've just asked John regarding what the marketers are looking for. Tarisai, is there a checklist right now for podcast marketing? Do marketers have certain things that need to be on there before they even consider approaching them? Or are they essentially breaking new ground here and developing that chain?
I think in Africa, we're still developing that chain because it forms part, as I mentioned earlier, it forms part of a marketing mix. I don't think brands are yet at that point where they'll say this is the only channel of communication that we'll use. So they'll use it in conjunction with the marketing mix and then have their brand mentioned on several platforms, being radio, print, TV. We're still in that mindset, traditional advertising of having 360 campaigns running. And the shift needs to come in realizing that digital is now almost king, and we need to have digital first sometimes and then spill it over into the other channels. But that form of marketing hasn't come into play yet. And so people just look at it in terms of, what am I listening to? What am I enjoying? What are my colleagues and my peers listening to? Who's the big person who's trending at the moment? And then afterwards, they start looking at the numbers. It's not a clearly thought out strategy in terms of, this is the only platform we're going to use, and this is how we're going to have our brand mentioned on that. It's still part of a marketing mix.
How does it rank? Like you said, it's not digital first yet, but even within digital, I mean, digital could be placing ads on
Google
ads or
whatever, paid media.
Yeah. How does it rank at the moment?
SEO, SEM, all of that. How does it rank? Good question. I would need to come back to you on that. But in terms of how it ranks, yeah, I need to come back to you on that one.
I can answer that. It ranks very low, and that's why I think there's.
I was trying not to say that, to be honest. I'm
saying that's
because I think it was going to be demotivating for me to say it ranks.
It's not
low.
demotivating. You see, I think it's the most important thing to say. The most important thing for me that is exciting, and to your point, is that the rewards far outweigh the opportunity cost. And because it is low on the rank, it's low priority, it's high in opportunity. And I think that's the message. It's like, no one is looking here, but it's all here. It's all happening here. So if you are starting to play in this space, you're only going to win, because come have this same conversation in 6 months' time, it's going to be a very crowded market. And then it's, once it's obvious to everyone, the opportunity cost is gone. Facebook advertising used to be, it cost you nothing. Now everyone's in that space, And so the opportunity cost is equalized. We're in that emerging opportunity space for podcasting. So the fact that it is low ranking in terms of the priority, I see it as a positive right now. And that's why I'm saying highlight that. Don't shy away from it.
John, you're an incredible marketer for podcasts, bro.
I definitely agree with you. It does need to rank higher because the one thing about podcasting, which makes it very good, is the fact that you can actually unpack a conversation. You can actually have 20 minutes discussing your product, whereas traditionally you only get 30 seconds, 10 seconds if you're lucky before people skip. Here we can actually have engagement, we can have a discussion, and you can be creative in your application of it. Say, for example, you're a company that specializes in disability. You start a program that educates people on disabilities, but in turn, you put in your advert that shows that you make the best wheelchairs in town or in the country, or you have the best hearing aids. So you've now used a space of talking about something that is relevant to people, that is educating them, but at the same time, you've managed to drop in and weave in your brand at the same time. So it's a very good space to be in because it allows engagement and connection. And that's what people are looking for at the moment. They want to be able to connect. They want to be able to know that we relate and we understand them as marketers and we're just not push advertising.
Yeah, I want to expand on that. Am I allowed to expand on that? Sorry. My brain explodes when you talk. I love what you're saying. I'm inspired when you talk. So just, examples of things that are really working. Maybe this is like practical examples. We have two sort of financial sector podcasts that we run for brands. The one I can talk about, it's the Old Mutual on the Money podcast. And it's such an informative sort of, the purpose there, again, to your point, is that they're not talking about Old Mutual. They're taking famous people or anybody who's got like a story about mismanagement of money and like having hardcore discussions with them. And what has happened with that podcast series is that people on TikTok have organically cut them out of the YouTube page. And they're getting one of them got 6 million views on TikTok the other day. That's a branded piece of informative content that is all flowers to Old Mutual that they got from giving value in the podcast. And there's another one that I can't talk about because we're only launching it in May, but it's an unbelievable podcast series where, again, it's coming from a wealth client that they wanted to have the type of money discussions with people that no one is having, like the emotional part, how money like controls us and affects us. We've recorded a bunch of those. I'm telling you now, I've never heard interviews like that. It's so compelling, so deep. So and it's not risky or anything. It's like very real and authentic engagement. I can see this brand's going to really win in that space. And it's because they're understanding the media, they're engaging with the media, and they're doing all the things that Tarasai just said, like focusing on that long tail engagement with your audience as opposed to being brand centric. And in that is a lot of wins, I think.
Yeah, long tail investment actually at the heart of what was pointed out in some of the articles and as being successful about podcasting. One of the best ways to convince someone to buy something is to tell them all the ways it could possibly go wrong so they could budget for the worst case scenario. So look, this has been a conversation that's really given all the flowers to podcasting and pointed out all the ways that it's a great opportunity. But do we have any stories of brands bombing out because they've gone on a podcast, or how have brands managed to maneuver through a podcast bombing or making a mistake? John, you got any example?
I'm loath to talk about them. I mean, yes. And I think like, my enthusiasm and experience level is that I've gone through this with, trial by fire. And, I work with a very diverse amount of podcasters because I've learned so much about this space. Yes, I've had to cancel campaigns. I've had to lose millions of rands on campaigns. I've had to, the way I started working with, actually where I met Mac was I brought him on for an Old Mutual Mac G podcast 3 years ago, which was extremely successful. And then he had his first sort of culture cancel. And it was my job to fire him on behalf of Old Mutual and cancel his whole podcast in a massive press release, after which he went into the media and said F you to the brand on his podcast. And that, that did a lot of damage, not only because not to this is not, not to throw anyone under the bus. Like, this is a wild environment. Everyone was the tensions were high. I felt both parties handled that really wrong, really badly, but it was because it was still new. Everybody was scared. This was a new space. And, I felt that at the time, what Mac was wasn't saying that to the brand. He was saying it to all brands. He was kind of making himself a hot potato if things didn't go well. But we've workshopped through this with the brands and with the because sometimes your podcasters can get embroiled in stuff on Twitter that isn't their fault, but they're still in it, and there's brand risk associated with it. So I think there are lots of examples. There have been, but they're getting fewer and fewer. Podcasts are wisening up. Like I said, we've been very involved in corporatizing the market, and what that means is educating the artists, the talent, what it's like on the other side of the fence, and understanding why. The beauty of the system is that if you are a podcaster that's gonna be a risk, you're not going to get adverts, you're not going to get clients, so you're in trouble. So you need to change something if you're serious about monetizing your craft and having it as a career. And so that's where we've done a lot of work in that space, but it does happen. But like I said, I don't want to harp. Mac is the anomaly. He's the Joe Rogan. There are hundreds of people who you'd never even consider having that incident, those kind of things. But the upside of it is this, and this is a controversial topic, and that is, for all of the controversial podcasts being canceled or having brands really pull the plug on big campaigns and things, their numbers are still doubling, exponentially increasing, which means regardless of your perception of the brand risk, they are speaking to an audience, whether it's a politically correct audience or if the audience you think you want, they are speaking to an audience in a way that no one else can or will. And that's why their audiences are still growing. And I think there is opportunity for brands who are willing to think about those sorts of things or focus on the reach they're able to get rather than the sort of controversy of the podcast. And there's a lot of education. That's not everyone's cup of tea. We've also had an issue with a podcast where a campaign just wasn't executed properly. We got paid. The podcaster was really good, but he didn't actually execute. His team wasn't strong enough to execute. When you advertise on radio, there's a whole team that makes sure that from clients to execution, that there's a whole chain of things, and the reporting happens. When it's a single person running a podcast, getting the analytics, getting them sent to you, making sure the hashtags are right. There's all typos, that it was done on all the shows. Those are a lot of the problems that we've seen in the past where we've lost clients because the execution wasn't done properly. And again, that's also why we're doing the Africa Podcast Network. I'm not selling you the Africa Podcast Network at all. It's not the purpose, but to build infrastructure for the podcasters so that those sorts of things are taken care of. The brand safety, the execution, and the group analytics are all taken care of, because it helps the industry and it helps the brands sort of cross that divide.
All right. I want to get into some of the most specific things. Adverts work, or what kind of adverts do you think marketers are more inclined to put onto podcasts? Teresa, just tell us quickly, like, what would you consider a traditional advert when it comes to online media? Is it just the poster with the stuff, or because what we're seeing are these live reads? You have 15 adverts on a YouTube video for some of the podcasts. You have audio podcasts where suddenly there's another voice and someone is advertising something as if it's a radio ad. But what are the adverts that actually are traditional? And then, John, maybe you could tell us what kind of adverts have you seen the most engagement with at the podcasts that you work?
All right. I just want to follow up with something that John said. I'll touch on the adverts just now. But in terms of data analytics, that's quite a key thing in marketing in terms of being able to get the actual research from the people. And that's a struggle always in marketing, to understand what people are talking about And so we've created apps where you can actually track and monitor online who's saying what are they saying, where are they saying it, and that data analytics feeds into your creative and into your marketing strategy. And what's important about podcasts, because of that engagement, it creates that platform for you to be able to get real-time data directly from the public. And that's something that as marketers, we need to appreciate. And also in terms of reach. So we now have, for example, the African Continental Trade Agreement, which means that brands are going to be moving across Africa as they're doing intertrade. Now you have a podcaster who's based in Kenya, who's based in Zambia, who's based in South Africa, who's based in Ethiopia, in Somalia, places that you would never traditionally be able to reach as your brand because of language barriers, because of marketing strategies, etc. And now you have a platform where you can actually go directly to a podcaster and have them advertise and market for you in Somalia, in Ethiopia, in their language, with their audience that they understand, which gives your brand additional reach, which is extremely important. And I think it's important as brands and as marketers and as companies to actually build on this industry. We have people that are extremely passionate and dedicated about what they're doing. They're putting in hours without education. They're putting in hours based on experience, and they need, as the industry experts, to come up with institutions and platforms that are going to support them and build them and give them the infrastructure and the provision that they need to be able to make a success of this industry. So I just wanted to add on that, but back to your point about ads. So now what we're seeing, a lot of the podcasts are actually on video. They actually live on YouTube. You have some podcasts that are just audio, but a lot of them are actually on video. So it can be as simple as having your branding at the back during a YouTube video, like how we have our Institute of Marketing branding at the back. Already that is advertising. You can have them, if it's a food product, you can have them eating and discussing. Well, I think Jon actually has a podcast where he sends whiskey to his clients and then they interact. Already by watching that video, that whiskey has been positioned as a brand, and people now consider that whiskey as, oh wow, okay, maybe I should have some of that. So in other words, what I'm saying is it's in terms of positioning yourself so that it's not that obvious as well that you're doing a marketing campaign, but it's also the engagement. Right now, are you wearing a Spotify cap? What is that?
This is StreamerCom. It's part of Comic-Con. But
oh, okay.
Yeah,
well, they just got brand advertising, free brand advertising on the Institute of Marketing platform. So that is in terms of adverts. Or you can have your traditional ones where we come up with a concept and then we cast artists. We go and we shoot a whole commercial in Joburg or Cape Town, streetliners. You have a storyboard, you have your directors, you have your producers, and then it becomes your ad, and it carries all your taglines. It has all that content that is packaged for television.
Jon, anything quirky that has proven to be a success?
No, I think you nailed it. I mean, there's so many options. There's so many different options, from placing ads to, like you said, live reads to these sort of interesting. So it's an endless sea of opportunity. And we've seen them all. I mean, the different brands are coming in with different objectives, and so they're getting different deliverables. There still is a need. I mean, this is why I'm saying the pre-roll, mid-roll, where it's recorded by, it's like third-party ads. They don't get the most engagement, but there's still an appetite for them. It's a safe place that brands feel comfortable playing. They're just looking for a reach metric in audiences. So it takes all types.
All right. I mean, I guess this is what's great about talks like these, is that we're able to not only offer strategies, but a real-time experience because of all the work that you've put in. Jon, you have such a lot of experience dealing with these podcasters and the marketers that trust the podcasters, that some of the experiences you have will end up setting the trend and really determining what the future marketers do. We'll talk about what marketers should be thinking about when they think about podcasts, but let's just get the big question for me out the way. Gareth Cliff started podcasting as simultaneous video and audio. But before then, there were a lot of audio podcasts that were essentially dominating the market. Spotify now has the Africa Podcast Grant, which is a massive investment in podcasting. So it's going to be around for a long time. But what exactly is the future of podcasting? Is it this mix of audio and video, or is video starting to dominate right now?
Yeah, so there is infrastructure built. I mean, interestingly, I'd say a couple of years ago, a podcast was sort of defined as an audio thing. It's not anymore. A podcast is video as well. And a very interesting thing that's just happened in the last week, YouTube have just dropped on the back end of YouTube, podcasting is an option. So it is now an official podcasting platform. When you upload your video, you select as podcast. We've seen a massive rise in audio only listens in podcasting. I mean, if you're I'm a piano fan, you're most likely listening to it on YouTube, not even videos. I just mean like audio on YouTube. So the YouTube component cannot be taken for granted. Podcasts tend to do better as a video component, and I don't mean just like an image with the audio, and I mean like to have a video component. They do very well. Currently, the video numbers do better than the audio numbers in most of the podcasts. But yeah, and I think I might be wrong about the Spotify have stopped investing in content. So I don't know if that's a new thing or an old thing. Their strategy has changed quite a lot in podcasting, and that's partially because I think they overspent. I don't know if you've read all the stuff. Spotify overspent in the podcasting market. I mean, I think they gave Joe Rogan something like $250 million for his podcast, and they spent something like $1 billion in podcasting last year. So I think they've slowed down on their investment. They're going to see their returns over time. But a podcast is essentially whatever it needs to be, but definitely audio and video is standard now. Some podcasts don't even have the audio part, which is something I'm trying to change. You're totally overlooking a monetizable audience. So, but yeah, both of them equal a podcast.
And the important thing about video is then people can actually almost download it, share it on their WhatsApp statuses, which directs people back to your page. People can, reshare just a little promo, a little snippet, and based on that little promo that you watched, you can then go back to the actual full read and listen to it. So video is playing quite an important role, especially on WhatsApp status, TikTok, shorts, Insta shorts, because it leads you back to the channel where you can actually listen to a 20-minute or a 30-minute or a 40-minute episode at your own time.
Jon, you have such a podcasting. But Teresa, you've mentioned something really important, is that marketers need to improve their education around podcasting, particularly how to market to the podcast audience. It seems easy based on how Jon explained it, but I reckon you do need some sort of insight. Of course, the Institute for Marketing Management allows for that. Talks like these help a lot. Teresa, could you tell us how marketers should be thinking about podcasting and what kind of educational tools they could use?
I think marketers need to really think about what people want, because that's the main conversation that we need to have. Yes, you have your product. Yes, you want to sell your service, but at the end of the day, what is keeping people up at night? What is making them not sleep? And if you can touch on those points and unpack that point, then you've got a brand loyalty. I mean, brand loyalty is so important. Brand loyalty is what will make someone get to, let me use Woolies, for example. You get to Woolies, and when you get to Woolies and they don't have roast chicken that day, you don't say, oh my word, Woolies, why don't you have roast chicken today? No, you're like, oh, okay, maybe next time I must come a little bit earlier so that I get my roast chicken. So you almost blame it on yourself because you've got that brand loyalty. So what we need to create is a culture of brand loyalty, because against all the odds of life and community and everything, someone will remain loyal to your brand based on the fact that you touched on their points. So even with mothers, what keeps them awake at night? If it's colic and you have a podcast that deals with colic and deals with mothers and all the things that affect mothers and affects their parenting journeys, pull it over into divorce, and you bring a brand in, for example, like a Nestle that has a colic formula that helps for children. I actually don't want to mention too many brands, sorry, because that'll be bad. But it then brings about that level of engagement and that level of connection. And brand loyalty is the most important thing that you can have in this era and date that we are living in. So a key metrics for you is, if I'm not there in the room and I'm not advertising and I'm not selling, will people still be able to appreciate the value that I bring into their lives? It's about that connection and that touch point. And that should be, I think, the main matrix for any brand at this point.
Jon, you find yourself having to teach marketers about how to advertise on podcasts when you meet them?
Look, there is a big educational space there. I think that the big elephant in the room is there is a perceived low reach metric, like you're not reaching a lot of people. I think the education is more understanding that it's a quality audience, not a quantitative audience, and that's where I think advertising needs to shift its mindset away from just massive reach to like a quality audience of the right people. And I think that's really the most educational, is understanding the power of a niche audience or a group of niche audiences. But most people are really open to it, and a lot of people are podcast listeners already, so they understand how to engage with podcasts. It isn't. I wanted to correct something. You said at the beginning it's a youth market. It's not a youth market. It's quite diverse. A lot of older people. The youth market are on TikTok, not on podcasts. The very youth market. It's kind of it's quite across the board, this podcasting market. So it really is identifying target audiences and figuring out with brands how to best speak to them in the voice of the podcast.
I 100% agree with you with that. You have people like Simon Sinek that focus on strategy and marketing strategies. You can spend a whole day listening to them and be able to touch on marketing strategies if you are not an expert prior.
It's an educational tool right there. I'm a firm believer in trying to determine what'll come next based on what's happening right now, but being aware of the curve, because curves change and trends change. So I guess what I'm asking is, what are we looking at here? Are we looking at a trend of marketing? Or are we looking at a fundamental shift that's happened? And are we able to even say what happens next? Any of you could take that.
I have an opinion on that, and I think it's a mistake to say that podcasting is taking over radio, or podcasting is in competition with radio. I say those things a lot because it's my core business, but it's not really. I think that podcasting is a different animal. It's a new animal. It's a new leg. It's a new finger on the tool set. It's not the be all. It's not the end all. It doesn't mean you have to stop doing other stuff. It has a particular purpose of like high-end niche engagement. On what other platform can you spend an hour or even 2 hours with your audience? And if you are a brand who needs some educational element, who wants to get deep penetration into the culture of what you're doing, there isn't another media that can do that. It's the one, but that's not for everyone. And you still need the other touch points. You still need your reach metric. You also need your brand awareness metric and la. And so I just think it's another, it's another arrow in your arsenal, and not something that's taking over or destroying anything else. Radio is suffering, but that doesn't mean there's not a space for radio.
Podcasting creeping into the marketing conversation during the considerations of how to spend, Terasai?
Definitely.
Yeah, I suppose it's to be expected, considering the fact that Joe Rogan's getting 30,000 US per episode from some of the brands that are partnering with him. Really, he's
as well within the trends in terms of, we have, for example, the video industry. It's also kind of suffering in terms of production, with your chat GPTs, your AIs and all of that. And I'm interested to know from you, Jon, in terms of longevity. given all the technology advancements? Is AI going to replace you?
Okay, how many hours we got here? I'm ready. So interestingly, I did it for an experiment. I didn't release it. I could do this. I wanted to see if ChatGPT could write, script, voice a podcast interview with itself. So there were two different characters, two different scripts. Could do it with its eyes closed. Like I wanted to start the world's first completely AI generated podcast. It's easy to do. I did it for fun. I'd never put it out there. I'm just saying, but I have, you're taking me into the AI space. I'm a big fan of it, and whether this is relevant to this topic or not, I'm going to just tell you my opinion. Damn it. You can't, it's here. There's no uninventing it, right? Those who are scared of it, and yes, the ethical discussions are really important. And yes, is it going to take over the world? That's a very important conversation. But those conversations we've been having for years, it's here. And it's important to be playing with it and toying with it and checking it and seeing, prodding it. I'm finding it very useful as a tool. Like I don't see it as a threat. I see it as a tool. The amount of content I'm involved with in my business or the things I need to do. Yes, okay, maybe I'm now cutting out a few people to do stuff, but now I can move quicker, and it still needs me because I got to build the thing and do the thing. And I think people need to start playing with it to see how it's useful and how it can lean onto your industry. It's going to change the whole industry. From that, there are threats, but my opinion is embrace it, mess with it, break it, fix it, toy with it, because it will become an extremely powerful tool. And if you're sitting there just having these conversations and worried about what's going to happen, that's who's dead in the water. That's whose careers are over. If an example is like, I always thought my big arguments were it could never do music, AI, but it can really well. So you have to think differently as a musician. Like now you need to make AI your instrument. I can't, I don't have to. And that's, if you start thinking that way and programming it that way, then you have an asset. So to your thing, I'm using it every day in podcasting and marketing and strategy, but it's not doing it. I'm using it as a tool. And for now, until it turns into something else, that's its importance in the industry for me. So I embrace it fully.
Tell you what, AI generated content is like a public interest unicorn at the moment. Anything that AI has generated, people are interested in, just to see what it can do. And in that respect, it's not going to be long before someone tries to slap an ad on it. And try to ride some of that public interest. Let's see if it can build ads itself.
For all those things it can't do that people are complaining about, bro, we're in the Nokia phase of ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
In a year's time, you won't know if the person on the screen having this conversation with you is real or not. Like that's where we're actually going with it. And one, yes, is that scary? Definitely. Two, that's a useful tool. I can speak at 5 conferences at the same time around the world. And so that's why I'm saying, if you change your perception of it, it's a useful tool, even if the consequences are scary. And even though they are scary, we can't uninvent the wheel. It's now here. So either play with it or get played with.
Right. Guys, I think we've been going for quite a while. Let's wrap up with the couple of takeaway questions. I've said a lot.
Sorry about the digression. I got a lot on that topic. So that's why I got carried away. I'll take it back.
I'm right there with you. We could start a whole thing based on that. But getting back to podcasts and marketing, a couple of things I've learned here. Not only about niche markets and high-end return on investments, but it does seem like marketers or brands are getting into the podcast space. Some of them are firmly there, have more experience than others. But based on this conversation, I think there'll probably be a lot more brands that will have a way to get into them using some of the tools that you've revealed of the trade, Jon. Also some of the insights that Terasai has. What are your takeaways based on this conversation that we have when it comes to podcasting and marketing for people watching podcasting or podcasting as a tool to reach audiences. Jon, you can start. Teresa, you can wrap us up.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I mean, I'm just the takeaways for me of what I've sort of kept on. I said at the beginning, and that is we're in a unique time where there is opportunity to really dominate this space. And that for me is if there's one thing to figure out, it's that, because once it's gone, it's gone. And that's what's most exciting at the moment. It's obviously a rising medium still. It's still going to be here in 6 months' time, in a year's time, in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time, and 10 years' time. And so it's just about your time. When are you ready to engage? That's where you'll get the most value the earlier you engage. And that's my takeaway. I mean, that's me.
Teresa, what do you think?
I think with the way the world is going, with the globalization, with the African trade agreements, with the communities, with the brand loyalties, I think as marketers, we need to be conscious of the fact that we need to have a following. We need to have brand loyalty. And that is achieved through platforms like this and by engaging with people that are passionate. And yes, in some cases, it might involve taking a risk, but a risk is what also gets your followers and your community to be loyal to you, because then they can see you in a different light. They can engage with you in a different facet. And it's important as well that we promote and continue to grow this industry. As a marketer, it's your responsibility because your budget spend is spent on either strategy, production, out of home, or digital. And there are people whose jobs are on the line. There's an industry that we're building here. And it's part of corporate social responsibility to build this industry and to appreciate it and the value for what it is versus just seeing it as a risk. When a country, especially in South Africa or in Africa, where job employment is very hard to get, we have people that are able to take up a mic and get an audience and build something and create something, which is entrepreneurship. And if we can support it and build this industry, we can actually make a difference as marketers.
Here.
Here. Succinctly put. Nice. Teresa, thank you so much for your time. And thank you to you, Jon Savage.
I hope you enjoy that. That was the Institute of Marketing Management South Africa talk that I did. And yeah, like I said, we went deep and I'm glad you got to hear it. And cool. So this is the end of the Digital Budgetcast. Remember, I don't know what I just said. It just like bumbled out of my mouth. I do one-on-one sessions too. So if you go find me on my Instagram and click the link in the bio, you'll find that I am bookable for sessions, consulting, help starting a podcast. Love chatting about it. All right, till next time. Hiya!